We are proud to have Remitly on board as our headline sponsors during the IPL this season. When it comes to family, no matter how far they are, they're always close to our hearts. Perhaps it's why millions of people trust Remitly to send money worldwide. It's easy to send money quickly, safely, and affordably, and with Remitly's great exchange rates and low fees, more of the money you send reaches the people who matter most. Because at the end of the day, family is everything. Download the Remitly app today and enjoy a special offer on your first transfer. Hello and welcome to the award-winning Wisden Cricket Weekly podcast. Yes, we've been newly crowned as the first ever Podcast of the Year award by the ECB, and Yaz has celebrated so hard that I'm taking over hosting duties this week. With me are Katya, Witney and Nathan Johns to discuss a pulsating first round of the County Championship, a landmark report into the future of cricket and much more. But first let's head to Mark Butcher for his thoughts on Harry Brook's appointment as England white ball captain. Brook will take charge in both ODIs and T20Is following Jos Buttler's resignation. Ever since I was a kid playing cricket at Burley in Wharfdale, I dreamed of representing Yorkshire, playing for England and maybe one day leading the team, Brook said. To now be given that chance means a great deal to me. Mark, it's not exactly a surprise that Brook's been given the job, but there were still a few ways England could have gone. I know we've discussed it loads on the podcast in the past few weeks, but is it the right call for you?
I think it was the only call. Outside of, we've obviously discussed sort of people on the outer coming in to captain the white ball stuff in the names of Bints and Billings and stuff like that. But I think in terms of people who are not only guaranteed a place in the side, but also have albeit limited but recent captaincy experience, then Brook was the obvious one, and also, I mean, it was telegraphed, wasn't it, with his pulling out of the IPL and all the rest of it. It just seemed as though that was the most likely way that England were going to go, and thus it has been proven. I think it's a pretty good call, actually. I mean, I like his sort of his feel for the game. I like it more than more than what he may or may not say to the press, which is obviously a large part of the captain's job, but not something that you should get wildly over sort of technical and critical on. And I think in terms of trying to bring together, because let's face it, England in terms of white ball cricket are in one of those phases where they're trying to bring in younger players. The relative age of the team is kind of dropping. And if you're going to build a team that is competitive over a long stretch of time, it's quite a good thing to have a captain who is of a similar age and experience as a lot of the players coming up, so that they can drive the whole thing forward together, and you don't have too much disparity between those who are very old, very experienced, and very young and inexperienced. It's more difficult to kind of get a collegiate team sort of feel going under those circumstances. So it's a great opportunity for England and for Harry Brook to kind of just almost start something afresh, with a fresh attitude, and a different leader to sort of drive things forward. It might not work in the immediate scope, but I think over the course of the next 4 to 5 years, the next sort of 50 over World Cup cycle, it could be a very, very good thing.
Yeah. Do you think there's a chance, though, that how badly could it go in the immediate term and still be okay, if you see what I mean? Like, it's such a big start, big next 12 months for him now, and you've obviously got India, then Australia, and now the T20 World Cup that he'll have to play, and he'll have to play basically every white ball thing between now and then as well. Like, even if that kind of all goes really badly, which is not impossible for England and Australia and England in India in a T20 World Cup, it will still be fine, do you think?
Well, I mean, in terms of the white ball stuff, it's been going very badly anyway. So it's it's not as though you're going to see, if things don't go well, it's not as though you're going to see a massive turnaround in terms of fortunes, because things have been average, to say the least, for a good couple of years now. The most difficult aspect is going to be for Brook himself. We've got two things to talk about here. One is the sort of like the direction of travel of the white ball side of England cricket, and the other one is the pressure on Brook, the player, and how that might affect, perhaps most pertinently, his performance over the next two huge Test match series. I think those are the two balancing acts. And I honestly, I don't think in the short term, I think probably in the first 2 years, it's unlikely to have to take too much of a toll. But perhaps in the 2 years afterwards, then you might have to start worrying about sort of the pressures and the workload upon him and how much he does of everything going forward. But right now, I think it's incredibly important as a new captain that he plays all of the white ball games. What is it? Something like 11 ODIs between now and the T20 World Cup, and 15 to 20 T20Is. So, in some of the bilateral T20s, you could probably say, okay, well, it's not that important that he plays in every single one. But as far as the ODIs and the Test matches are concerned, obviously he's going to be involved, form and fitness permitting.
Yeah, and I guess there's not exactly questions around him as a player, but that it feels like there's a challenge that he has to conquer in terms of that playing spin. And that's going to be big when it comes to that next T20 World Cup, which is in India. I guess the two questions are like, one, when you watch him bat, what do you think is like the root cause of that issue? And then two, like, is that a challenge for him if he's doing all the other stuff, he's sorting out, not exactly sorting out who gets the team bus on time, but having all these conversations, is that going to give him the space to work it out, if you see what I mean?
Well, no, because I don't think that he has a problem against spin. I think he has sometimes he has a mental issue in terms of the tempo or the way that he tries to impose himself upon spin far too soon. I think sort of footwork wise and actually technically, I don't think he's got a problem against spin at all. And he's kind of proven that in various circumstances, perhaps not when the ball has been ragging square. But I do think that as captain, I think this is going to help him because he has to take more responsibility, and taking a bit more responsibility might mean taking a little bit more time to read the lie of the land before he tries to peel off one of the many magnificent strokes that he has in his armory. So I actually think it's a good thing. Having that extra, see, I think he's played in a way that has been devoid of responsibility, and that has been his problem with spin. It hasn't been the fact that he can't play it. It's been that in his mind, his only job is to go out there and dominate it from the second that he walks to the crease. And being captain, you have a slightly different set of responsibilities, not only to your team and the results, but also to sort of to lead the way in terms of your actions. And that, I think, might be something that really focuses the mind when it comes to the way that he goes about trying to build innings as opposed to trying to play great shots.
On field wise, I mean, I feel like when we talk about England and white ball cricket, we talk a lot about their approach and the mentality. And actually, white ball cricket can be like a very tactical game, and that can sometimes get lost in discussion around England. Have you seen stuff from Brook that you think shows that he might have the sort of the tactical nous to know when to bring on a spinner to a certain player, or when to set a certain field and that kind of thing?
Yeah, I think I've seen enough small sample size when he's been captain of the Northern Superchargers in terms of having the feel to kind of make the right call at the right time when it comes to sort of bowling changes. And sort of saw him pull off a couple of great defences as captain in the field for the Superchargers last summer. And then when asked about it afterwards, he sort of said, he just went with what felt like the right thing to do at the time. And quite a lot of it is that, not being stuck in terms of any sort of formula, and just being willing to kind of read the runes as they come at you in 50 over and 20 over cricket. And I think that's, that sort of instinct for the game is something that can't be taught, really. So yeah, I like it. I've liked what I've seen of him on the field. And he's definitely not clouded in sort of any sort of doctrine or dogma. He kind of goes with what he thinks is the right thing to do at the time. And provided you have the sort of resources in terms of your team and your bowling attack at your disposal, then you can do a lot with that sort of gut feel for the game. So all of that remains to be seen. But I honestly don't think that it's as big an issue, his schedule and the work that he's going to have to do over the next 12 months or so, as other people might think. He's still a very, very young man, very hungry. He's pulled out of the IPL, which does free up some time to sort of get his get his head straight and get his game into the right sort of order. And some people might say, well, he might have solved his issues against spin by going to the IPL this year. I'm not sure I really buy into that, simply because he's been there before. It's not as though he doesn't have any experience of that. But I do think that a slight mental shift in terms of his batting towards taking more responsibility for the outcome is going to be something that will improve him, perhaps more than having spent 2 or 3 months slogging the crap out of it in the IPL.
On to another player who might well be playing a lot more for England in all forms of cricket soon. The standout performance from the opening round of the County Championship came from Somerset's Tom Banton, who hit 371. And obviously, it's been just an amazing sort of year or so for him since the start of last summer, after he had kind of, he exploded onto the scene and then sort of drifted away a bit. And it seems sort of through the County Championship has kind of rediscovered a bit of that love for the game. Obviously, gets a recall for England earlier this year. But do you think he could be an option in all forms at some point?
I think that there's certainly a chance that he could. I guess the issue. Let's start with the Test match team. At the moment, the spots that are potentially up for grabs in that Test match lineup are opener at number 3 potentially. As far as sort of players who are under a bit of pressure, you're talking sort of Crawley and perhaps Pope, perhaps. And so those are very much top order positions. But the wonderful thing about Banton has been, and here's a lesson for a few, and something that Will Smead might have taken on board, because he's just decided to make himself re-available for red ball cricket, is that quitting, particularly as a batsman, quitting sort of red ball cricket before you've played an enormous amount of any sort of cricket is a very, very bad idea. Getting the feel for batting time, getting the feel for solving problems, getting the feel to be able to go out there and bat without having run rate pressure on you every single time you walk to the crease is a very good thing for your game all round. And it's great to see Banton scoring huge runs in the county championship. And the confidence that he will gain from that, and the sort of the overall respect that then comes your way from other players is something that shouldn't be underestimated. And so, yeah, he's a very, very talented boy, and will, without any question, be in conversations around all 3 formats. I mean, the most likely thing is that he finds himself back in the white ball teams sooner rather than later. But it's not beyond the realms of possibility that Test matches hove into the horizon should he continue the sort of form that he's in. It's also, he and James Roux, a couple of guys that we mentioned in the preview pod of the County Championship, both making big runs in the first round. Lots of draws as expected on flat pitches or sort of slow pitches, low pitches in the early part of the summer. So there will be a lot of runs scored, but it's a terrific thing that a player such as himself, I think, has said by his own admission that he kind of fell out of love with the game, sort of wasn't entirely sure that it was what he wanted to do, let alone play for England again, etc. Has rekindled his joy and his love, and is starting to make big runs in the 4-day stuff, and who knows where that might lead.
Yeah, and I guess as well, I mean, because he did an interview with Katya during the winter, and spoke about how when you win a game of 4-day cricket, there's just nothing like it, basically. Like talking about, basically being in the dressing room after they beat Surrey at Taunton. Even when he'd injured his ankle and was going to be out for the rest of the season, just saying that was, like, there's no feeling yet, nothing else quite like it. And then also the fact that, like you say, that obviously when guys are trying to establish their games, it's good to play some red ball cricket. But I feel also like when players are trying to re-establish their games, like even if you just bat for like 2 hours and get like 37, like you're never batting for 2 hours at any other time. And if you just want to feel that bat on ball again, it does make such a difference, doesn't it?
It's absolutely, it's invaluable. I mean, it's a good thing. My thinking of sort of my own career, that sort of looking back on it, I wish I'd sort of played or taken the sort of like the shorter formats more seriously at various times, just simply because of you're trying to build an all-round game. It shouldn't just be concentrated on either high scoring rates and large volume of boundaries, and it shouldn't just be concentrated on leaving the ball outside off stump. The whole batting is exactly that. It's being able to go through the gears and play in all manner of styles and tempos on all manner of surfaces and conditions. So it's absolutely right. I'm glad that Smead has decided that he wants to go back into it as well, because I think it will improve his white ball game, which is obviously his strength. And being a batsman rather than a hitter of cricket balls is something that should be lauded and applauded and recommended everywhere.
Well, thanks very much for joining us, Mark, and chat again next week. Katya, on the Brook appointment, you can discuss, his merits as a captain, but there is also the question over what this means just for him as a player. And forget everything else, he's just going to have to work really hard over the next year or so, isn't he?
Yeah, I mean, it's the feature of the international calendar now that if you're an all-format player, you're going to be constantly on the move. But Brook's more than just an all-format player. I mean, when you look at, especially in the Test match, the two marquee series coming up, the India series, the Ashes series, how England go in those two series is directly tied up in how Brook performs as well. So it's not just that he's that all-format player. He's so integral to their plans in Test matches and now as captain in the white ball formats that he's going to be constantly on the go. I think the more Test matches Brook play, normally the more Test matches England will win, pretty much is the idea behind it. And if you look at the cricket England have got just this summer, you've got that white ball series against the West Indies, which is likely going to be his first as captain, plus that test against Zimbabwe. What side England put out for that, we don't know yet. But hypothetically, let's say he plays that. You've also got then the 5 Test matches against India, 6 white ball matches against South Africa, I believe, T20s against Ireland. And then even before you get to the Ashes, you've also got a white ball series in New Zealand. And then going on the future tour schedule, a week after the final test of the Ashes, England are in Sri Lanka for an ODI series and a T20 series that directly runs into the T20 World Cup in February 2026. So that's a mad run of 10 months. I can't work out in my head exactly how many games that is, but that's a hell of a lot of days of international cricket. The only thing I would say about the schedule thing is that it makes the IPL ban look kind of a better thing from Brook's point of view. So you've got all of that cricket in the next 10 months, but from February for the run into the English season and then the next international summer, which will be a lower key international summer anyway. It's like New Zealand and Pakistan, I think, are coming next summer, unless I've got that completely wrong. You've got February, March, April, if he wants to play county championship games, to basically do nothing. So because he's now got that window where he can't play in the IPL, that feels like it's a targeted decision more than it did when he originally did it, and it feels like it's going to benefit him more now. We've talked about the IPL decision before, but I can't see his stock plummeting in 3 years. So you can kind of reassess where you are in 3 years, how you're managing that kind of workload. We don't know where world cricket's going to be in 3 years, much less where Brook's currently non-existent white ball captaincy is going to be in 3 years. So there is that kind of gap where he's not playing cricket that other previous all-format captains haven't quite had, I guess.
Yeah. Well, let's move on to the county championship. And we discussed Tom Banton's innings with Mark Butcher, but Nathan, this was just a brilliant game, full stop, wasn't it? And especially that last day was kind of drama that like the county championship actually produced on a pretty regular basis, wasn't it?
Yeah, and I think it's great because, at least from my perspective, I didn't sit down and watch all 4 days of this, but they seem to be getting their social content right on the county championship a lot at the minute. I mean, I think the defining picture was, I think BBC Sport put up the field at the end and the last ball, and I think there was a third slip to the spinner who was fielding on his knees with a helmet on, like stuff like that. Like it's just brilliant, and I think that they've done it quite cleverly. I think they realize that is when this is going to be at its most appealing as a competition, is when you just have all these funky fields going on, etc. And it was a thrilling game. I also just enjoyed the video of was it Archie Vaughan's wicket that was slightly contentious. I think it's one of those where everyone gets a bit excited when he shoulders arms and it hits the pad, but I think even the Somerset club account was finding that one interesting. But yeah, look, it was an enthralling game. And I think, was it you stirred the pot a little bit with your tweet saying that for what the county championship got to a last ball finish more quicker than the IPL did? Is that what you said?
Yeah, it did. Yeah, and that is true. The IPL is yet to have a game that's gone to the last ball of the 20th over with 6 or fewer runs needed to win. So that it's true. You can't get me on that. But yeah, I mean this was amazing from Wisden because we were discussing this on the Patreon pod yesterday, Katya. But when Banton was going on that third morning, I was thinking just let him bat for as long as he needs to get past Lara, or not as long as he needs to, but give him half a day because you'll have loads of time. And then Wisden just bat and bat and bat. It's 200 overs in the end in that third innings to secure the draw. Obviously, Brett D'Oliveira makes 100, and he's obviously the main hero. But you got Matthew Way didn't face that many fewer balls than D'Oliveira in the end for his 87, I think. And then also Tom Hinley, the number 11. Batting for about 40 minutes at the end. It was just an amazing drama.
Yeah, I feel almost as big a fan of Brett D'Oliveira's innings than I am as Tom Banton's innings on the previous day. To score 50 runs across 2.5 sessions, that's brilliant. And that's county cricket kind of, I guess it's the two kind of swings of it. You've got Banton scoring 300 and whatever, he scored 370 odd over a day and a half, and then you've got Brett D'Oliveira battling out for 2.5 sessions to score 50 runs and then getting given out to a really dodgy LBW decision. But yeah, no, big fan of Brett D'Oliveira's innings. And also on that final day, I said it on the Patreon, but I was doing the live blog yesterday, so I had all of the different tabs open. And I had the Somerset game on first because I thought Somerset were just going to completely go through Worcestershire and it was going to be wrapped up quickly. And then I just kind of stopped checking in with it during the day because it was just Worcestershire just didn't look like they were going to crumble. And we said it, like Worcestershire, we really feared for them before the start of the season that they were going to be kind of the odds-on favourite for relegation. But that is a really decent result to get into, to eke out a draw against a side that could be a title challenger. That is a really decent result for them, especially early in the season on April wickets and down at Taunton.
But I love that point you made there on the kind of the dichotomy of the two innings and the variety, because I think it was 2 or 3 weeks ago, Cam Ponsonby was on and you were talking about IPL boundary percentage and how is cricket kind of a little bit going down the road of what some American sports have gone down, where kind of the nerds have figured out the best way to win games, and everybody does that, and it's everybody just tries to get the higher boundary percentage and bat in the same way, whereas you've just pointed out within one game, let alone one round of or one different rounds of matches, you've got guys trying to go about getting different results in completely different ways. And I think that does appeal to a hell of a lot of people. I think it's worth highlighting that, definitely, in comparison to maybe what's going on a little bit elsewhere in the world.
I feel like we've gone a bit giddy with the start of the county championship and the sun coming out. It's kind of made me a bit like,
oh, wait till next week and it starts raining. round 2 and it's raining all weekend. Yeah.
Well, I mean, it's interesting we said about the social media as well on the county championship and people getting it right, because Craig Overton's putting in some interesting stuff. So replying to a Somerset fan who I think was critical of him not bowling enough for the final day, replied to this guy on Twitter whose tweet has got 1 like. So Overton's, he's tagged on the tweet, but he sought it out. He says, you wouldn't be happy if I bowled from one end all day, would you? Why don't you piss off and support someone else? And that's great. You don't get that in the IPL either. So,
but to point out again, like he's the guy who originally tweeted it has then commented and saying, oh, so I'm unblocked. So clearly they've had issues before online.
Oh, I missed the unblocking bit. Oh, that's brilliant.
Yeah, I like the fact that Craig Overton's arch nemesis is a guy with, I don't know how many followers on Twitter, that he keeps periodically blocking and unblocking.
Yeah.
But more of it. I mean, again, we're talking about how do you keep the county championship alive a little bit, and everyone's getting giddy. We're getting giddy because we're cricket buffs and we love it, and we love the fact that, like you said, you can bat in a variety of different ways. But if they're getting this type of stuff is going on as well, and people are taking the mickey out of bad LBW decisions, or there's beautiful sun-kissed photos of ridiculous fields, I mean, that appeals to a different audience to maybe what we're talking about and who we're talking to a little bit. So, I mean, I'm all for that. I mean, if that's something the county championship needs to do, and I think they've realised they need to do that, all power to them, because I think it's only going to help.
Yeah, and as you've kind of both hinted at, it wasn't just here that the county championship sort of caught light. It was a brilliant round sort of across the country. And I should plug here the Patreon. Me and Katya did a full half-hour show on this last night. Katya by the end was talking about Bernie Ecclestone and how his ideas could improve the county championship. So that's worth going and signing up there and seeking out. But I guess the other brilliant finish, I guess, was at Lords, where Lancashire just hung on to, well, that could have gone either way, that final day, where Lancashire looked like they might complete a chase in sort of quick time at one point, and then looked like it might just peter out to a draw, and then Middlesex take 2 wickets late in the day. So that was also another excellent game, runs for Max Holden in that game as well. But actually, I thought in a way, the other performance of the round came from Notts, who I thought were another side that we maybe feared could struggle this season, and then Durham, who, you know, look pretty strong, you know, make a decent total first up, 378, and Notts from then on don't really put a foot wrong. You know, they get up to 500, really strong performance for the tail, and a very eye-catching performance, Katya, for Josh Tongue, who is a guy that's probably been, you know, easy to forget about, given, you know, how he kind of burst onto the scene in that 2023 Ashes, and has, you know, gone through a lot of injury problems, but showed that he's still sort of a real contender to be like a first choice bowler for England in Test cricket.
Yeah, I guess the Josh Tongue kind of story has been in the background for the last year while he's been injured. And it's quite easy to forget that test, because that test at Lords that he came into for the Ashes, obviously he made his debut against Ireland at Lords, but that Ashes test at Lords had so much in it. They had the, you know, the Bairstow stuff, the Stokes stuff, the line injury, everything. But Tongue was really, really good in that test match, and he came in that kind of enforcer role, and then got injured so quickly afterwards. And England have had so many new bowlers come in during that time, and seemingly have so many who haven't yet come in, who could come in, like Sam Cooks, and, you know, Dylan Pennington still hasn't made his England debut yet. That Tongue has been quite easy to forget about, and I guess he reminded everyone at making his Nottinghamshire debut like a year after he joined the club, because of all the injuries he's had, what kind of quality bowler he still could be for England. And it's worth just like on how match changing or match turning that spell he bowled yesterday was. He took 3 wickets in, I think, 7 balls, when the match had kind of been petering along for a little bit on the morning session of the final day. And he really completely turned it on its head. It looked like the Notts bowlers, that it was a little bit kind of flat before that, and he comes on, bowls genuinely quickly, bangs it into the pitch, and completely pulls the game back into Notts' grasp. I mean, that performance from Notts was built on a fantastic batting effort, but also without Tongue, I can easily see how that game just kind of would have petered out during the day. So yeah, it's really encouraging signs for Notts, and potentially encouraging signs for England, although with a word of caution over fast bowlers, injuries, coming back from injuries and that kind of thing, I guess.
Yeah, but then I guess also they've just got to pick the guys who are fit, don't they? And, you know, we had Stone ruled out of the India Test series at the start of this round of fixture, which is another blow with Wood out, Stone out, Cast injured at the moment. You know, Archer's obviously not going to play all 5 or all 6, I guess. There's a real chance for him to sort of rest and rotate. And also, you know, Josh Tongue, he's basically the exact same age as Gus Atkinson, so you actually could have, you know, talking about that transition on from, you know, from Broad and Anderson, I guess, that's gone on for a little while now. He's fully part of that. We also had the other fun thing in this, which was probably the most quintessential county championship moment of the round. I don't know if you saw this, Nathan. The sprinkler that went off on the was it on the second morning, I think?
Yeah.
Oh god.
Yeah.
On the Saturday morning. It was really cool. Like literally staring, looking at the ground, and suddenly this massive jet of water comes up off the Trent Bridge pitch, sending like players scattering.
I had that once. I was covering a League of Ireland football match back home once, and in the middle of the game, and it just goes off. And this poor guy had to kind of try and go get a wheelbarrow, because it was just off the sideline, to kind of cover it. And as he finally got the wheelbarrow on, and it's been pushed off by the jet stream. And as he gets it on, another one on 10 yards away goes off. So yeah, no, I've had my share of sprinkler drama.
So Surrey drew at Chelmsford, forced to follow on there, and were at one point sort of 180 for 6 in response to, you know, a big Essex first inning score, and you're actually thinking that Essex might be able to force a result there. 100 for Jordan Cox, which I guess may be also notable in the conversation, and yeah, I guess, you know, it probably doesn't mean too much on a flattish pitch in which Surrey didn't even fancy picking Dan Worrell in slightly mysterious circumstances.
Yeah, but do we know what happened there?
No, so we've tried to talk to Surrey about it, and they've not said he's injured, and they've not said it's personal reasons. And so our working theory is that by process of elimination, they've just not picked him for cricketing reasons, which, based on the flatness of the surface, is maybe fair enough. But also maybe says something about, you know, what Worrell can and can't offer in different conditions in their eyes, I guess. But yeah, we don't know exactly, but that's what our thinking is, basically. But yeah, interesting. I mean, you know, well done to Ben Folkes in that game. A gritty 90 in the first innings, and then another gritty 50 in the follow-on. As sort of, you know, it's kind of as you were, I think, in the county championship title race. Down in Div 2, I guess there was the one real sort of low-scoring April shootout of the round was between Kent and Northants. Mireya, number 4, I like the look of him there. That makes more sense to me than him opening. He's a stroke maker, gives him a chance to do that. But in a way, the performance of the game came from Keith Dudgeon, who people didn't know loads about before the start of the season. He's played a bit of South African domestic cricket, but he's not a standout name by any means, I guess. But Nathan, you've been doing some digging into his time in Irish club cricket.
Yeah, he played for CIYMS in Belfast.
What does that stand for?
Oh God, you put me on the spot there. There's two. There's CI and there's CSNI, which is Civil Service Northern Ireland, and everyone always confuses the two. Okay. He was an overseas pro there for a couple of years ago. Not the most famous overseas pro that has been. I mean, A.B. de Villiers played in that league once. Carlos Brathwaite played in Dublin once for a season. But yeah, I think he was very successful. I think he got loads of runs and loads of wickets for them. So I think there's an element of people over there are not overly surprised. I guess maybe just the age profile of, he's late 20s, isn't he? So only getting a county stint at that age maybe might have surprised a few people, but I think those who have seen him in club cricket on this side of the water are not overly surprised. It just kind of came with a smaller club in a smaller cricketing country, I suppose.
Yeah, from what we hear, he was actually a recommendation to Kent from Joe Root, because Dudgeon was, I think he played one game for Pile Royals this season. Root clearly knows.
Good net bowler then.
What we're talking about. Yeah, exactly. Just running through the other results. I mean, so that was a good one for Kent. The two other results in Div 2 were similar-ish games, actually, where Derbyshire and Leicestershire both made a good total, batting second in response to a middling total, and then managed to keep the chase in check. I guess one thing in that Glamorgan-Leicestershire game, which we'll keep an eye on through the course of the season and maybe won't change how we think about it, but Bashir didn't go great, sort of going over 4 and over. And obviously, if that was just a one-off thing, then you wouldn't take much notice of it, first round of a county season. But given some of his struggles over the winter, I guess that's something we're going to keep talking about it until he takes a bag full of wickets or bowls a really tight spell on Katya.
Yeah, I mean, I guess there's also the obvious kind of comparison to what Somerset spinners were doing at Taunton. And I think while you can say Jack Leach bowling a 65 over spell and holding up an end is an example of what spinners can do in April, he also didn't run through Worcestershire on final day, which is what you would be looking at from a selection point of view, or what England do look at from a selection point of view, what you want from their spinners. Obviously, Bashir does have that possibility, and is kind of England uncertain on whether Leach has that same kind of explosive possibility. But you would want your spinner in a county championship game to be able to hold up an end, and it's again just the running theme of kind of Bashir versus Leach over the first part of this summer will be interesting. But I don't think reading too much. It's really hard to make like these kinds of assumptions one game in on an April wicket, and I don't want to go too hard into Bashir after not playing that much cricket.
Is it just Bashir versus Leach? I mean, in the immediate future, but I mean, because like there are other spinners who did semi well in round 1 as well. I mean, I know Yaz is a big Jack Carson fan. Well, he got 4 on the first innings for Sussex, didn't he? So like that is also an element of this to watch, is it? Or is it just we're just going to take any spinner who does reasonably well and kind of look to pedestal them a little bit?
Yeah, no, I think Carson's really interesting. I think that he probably hit bad form at the wrong time ahead of that India tour. But I think there was that Lions camp they went on where they kind of, obviously there was the Twitter video that went round of Bashir, and people kind of assumed that he got picked just based on that. They kind of took a group of spinners, one of whom was Bashir, to this Lions camp and then picked out Bashir as the best of them. I think Carson would have been ahead of him in the pecking order before that and then didn't tear up trees there, and that's what they went for, but had a brilliant season last year, like 50 wickets at 22, I think, in a promotion campaign. And so if he does similar in Div 1, he's not Bashir tall, but he's still tall. I think there's definitely stuff they could like that he can bat as well. Bowled a brilliant, I guess, in some ways, in that it's a shame that Sussex didn't give him more of a chance to bowl into victory on that last day. I think they didn't go too hard in that third innings and eventually set Warwickshire something like 390 in about 45 overs, which then ended up being, a dull draw. Maybe if he's defending 360 overs or something, we get to see, more of what Carson can do. He did bowl one brilliant ball in that final innings. But yeah, I think he's definitely a contender. I guess there's also Rian Ahmed, who wasn't called on to do loads in that Leicestershire game, but he's another person who could be in the conversation. But yeah, I think Carson definitely possible. I mean, he's another, this is a big podcast for Northern Irish cricket, isn't it?
Huge, yeah. Jack, he came over quite young to Sussex, didn't he? I think Ed Joyce actually jokingly sometimes says he regrets that because he played a role in getting him over, because he would have been at Sussex when that happened. Yeah, it's an interesting one because it's back home in Ireland. It's an ongoing conversation. At what point do they make a big push for him if he's not getting England or not? I think it's probably still a long way away from that. But yeah, speaking of Twitter getting picked off Twitter, there was one ball, he got one through the gate that spun an absolute mile. That popped up. If it is Twitter selection policy, what, Toby Rowland-Jones might get a call. Do you see that inducker he bowled?
Yeah, that was amazing. Actually.
That was a ridiculous delivery.
Yeah, that should. Yeah, that was. People should be talking more about that Toby Rowland-Jones delivery. Go and seek it out. Yeah, it is amazing. That's what the County Championship is all about. And then I guess the final game we haven't mentioned is Yorkshire against Hampshire, which I think wasn't a great game, kind of in terms of quality as well as in terms of sort of the narrative through it. I mean, Yorkshire threw it away a bit in the first innings. Somehow everyone in the top six got to double figures, but Milan's 31 was the only score above 20. I mean, that as a coach's nightmare. Hampshire weren't loads better. I think it was something like 7 scores in double figures and no 50s, but they had 3 scores in the 40s, which was enough to get up to a bit of a lead. But I guess, again, if we're talking about England stuff here, Sonny Baker took just 3 wickets in the game, but in the second innings, 2 wickets and 4 balls, including Bairstow for a half century. And that is the kind of thing, given that England already like him, that doing that on County Championship debut is just a little bit of an encouraging sign, I guess.
Yeah, I mean, it's just those kind of early season selection decisions that you keep an eye on for these County Championship rounds. And when you look at Josh Tongue taking wickets, Sonny Baker taking wickets, especially, as you've said, with Stone and Wood injured, it's just, it highlights all the possible options that they've got. And Sonny Baker does look like a legitimate option. I mean, it was kind of interesting when he was given that developmental contract over the winter, having not really done a lot or not really been one of the high profile names that people were looking at before the winter.
Well, as I said, much more on the County Championship on the Patreon. So go and seek that out. I guess, we're into the county season now, and what we don't know is what it's going to look like exactly next year. There's been reports that there's going to be sort of another review into what the ideal county schedule should be. But I guess kind of with the view that now that the 100 money is in the game, there is an ability to actually say this is what we think the ideal county schedule is from a cricket point of view, rather than saying, we need 14 blast games because we just absolutely need that money, or that kind of thing. I guess one thing that's being talked about is a drop to 12 games rather than 14 games in the County Championship, which I'm going to steal something from Cameron Ponsonby in a second. But first, I'm just going to go to Nathan and say, do you have thoughts on the county scheduling in general, or the kind of things that they should be taking into account? What are your non-negotiables when it comes to the county structure?
Well, it's tough because it depends on what perspective you come at it from. Because if you come at the perspective of what we are, which is we're incredibly giddy about what was an exciting first weekend in the sunshine, you're going to go, well, yeah, you need a minimum number of county championship games, and does 12 drop below that, or is that where it sits at? But like you said, the 14 blast games is something that financially is probably a bit more of a non-negotiable. Obviously, for the ECB and those counties that are involved in the 100, the TV money that comes in from that, there's an agreement where they need to supply a number of games. I think as a whole, sport in general is just kind of needs to come to a reckoning on what is less is more in a certain number of cases. I mean, outside of the IPL and maybe American sports where they play every day, these countries just don't really have the market sizes to sustain the amount of sport that there is right now. And I do think there are a lot of diehards who are going to go, oh, hang on, if you're giving me less, I'm going to be annoyed, and that's few less money, fewer people coming in the door. But I definitely think there is an element of the conversation to consider here that is, well, the less you play, the more meaningful it is. And I think that, I don't know what that looks like on the balance sheet in terms of monetizing all of this, but that is something that I think not just cricket but sport as a whole is slowly grappling with, and I think that's ultimately one of the themes that's underpinning this conversation. Yeah,
it's interesting, Nathan, with your Ireland hat on, I guess. I know that they've talked to us, perhaps this is kind of putting a spin on the fact they don't get to play as much cricket as some of the players would like to, but they've actually talked about scarcity value in terms of test matches that they host as well. I mean, I think you'd like it to be a little bit less scarce, but there is a thing there, isn't there? That like,
well, that's a different conversation, because at the minute they're playing one game every 6 months, which is far too scarce. And look, it's great for someone like me, and anytime I write about Test cricket, because people are so starved of it. You know, the stuff I put out there does reasonably well, but you know, I think that's the opposite end of the spectrum there. And I think if it wasn't for finances, they definitely would be playing. There might be a conversation on that generally, but it's because they can't afford to, rather than they're trying to keep people hungry. No, it's not quite that at this stage. But it's an interesting question. How much is too much? 12 county championship games, it doesn't sound like a lot, but you know, over the course of a summer with everything else that's going on, it's still quite substantial.
Yeah, it would still be longer than first class competitions in most other countries. I guess the one thing that you have to take into account with England is that it rains here, so you might want to build in a bit of leeway.
No, it doesn't.
Not this weekend.
It doesn't rain, it just sprinkles.
Yeah.
I guess the one thing that I've kind of struggled with is, like, if you have 12 games, what does that actually look like in terms of a competition structure? I mean, already you have the situation Division 1 where not everyone plays everyone twice, but if you go to 12 games, and you'd have actually that most teams wouldn't play each other twice. But Cam Ponsonby, and I'm just shamelessly stealing this, but I'm giving him credit, so it's fine. He put the idea to me that if you go with 9 teams in Division 1, 9 teams in Division 2, you can do it in a similar way to what they do in Scottish football, I think, where after each team has played everyone else once, you take the league table then, and then the top 5 all play each other once more. So then they've all played 12 games, and the bottom 4 each play each other once more. So they've all played 11 games. So you get, 10 teams in the country play 12 games, 8 teams in the country play 11 games. And that is a way that you could do it, I guess. And to me, it's probably preferable than the other way, which would be something like 3 divisions of 6. Everyone plays everyone twice. And then you have some sort of playoffs, maybe around promotion relegation. But then, who really is going to care about the 3rd, 4th playoff in Division 3? So
that seems far too radical. I feel like it. I understand the need, that there is a need in a lot of ways for the championship to go down to less games, but you need to do it with as little change as possible. And that's what will get counties and people on board. I don't think splitting the whole Strauss review thing and the splitting into 3 divisions and whatever, I don't understand what you've just suggested, really. But that just feels like it's going to be far too radical to pitch to people. And if you do want to reduce the number of games, you need to do it as simply as possible.
Yeah, but then how, I guess, how do you do a 12 game competition in a 10-team league? It's just, that's also something that is...
Well, simply you just rotate who you're playing twice year on year. Well,
the trade-off, I guess, the way to sell what you suggested is, yes, we're cutting your games, but in the long run, we're probably increasing the amount of meaningful games you play, and we're cutting out dead rubbers. I think that's the tagline. Whether that actually happens in practice is obviously another question entirely. I don't follow Scottish football as well as Cam does, so I can't tell you how many meaningful games there are. But the kind of big point here is from the point of view of meaningful cricket. And again, we're saying this in the context of being giddy about what was an excellent weekend of county cricket. But I'm sure county fans would be screaming at this, saying, well, why are you cutting the fixtures that are still a lot more meaningful to a lot more people than rather, at the end of the day, our county diehards, are they going to be as belligerent about a Blast game getting cut, or even, obviously not 100 games, because, there are conversations about how much do people genuinely care about those teams and their fortunes. But then that's obviously the financial picture, right? Because you talk about saturation in cricket, like, cricket doesn't have too many red ball games at the minute. Cricket has too many white ball games, but they're not going to cut down on the white ball games, really, are they? So it's fitting that into the schedule as well, because at the end of the day, I don't think it's a controversial thing to say that the people who are listening to this are going to be, why are you cutting the more meaningful format? I
think you can also say, especially when there's just been this windfall with the 100 investment, that investment should be used to... Subsidise is the wrong word, but why are you then justifying cutting cricket when the game is in a more financially healthy place, or has been billed as in a more financially healthy place? If you think about the Strauss review, that came at a time when the county game really wasn't in a healthy place. It also came off the back of a crisis point of England cricket. And if you're looking at this review now, you should be approaching it from a point of, how can we use this investment to make county cricket better? And if the county diehards, as you say, are the ones who we want to be keeping on board, then why are we cutting games at this point, if that makes sense?
Yeah, but then I guess the other way is that you look at the other purpose of, obviously, the county cricket has a responsibility to its fans, but its purpose is also to serve the England team and people. Obviously the 100 is there and not being moved, but one of the effects obviously been that English players play less 50 over cricket, especially the good ones that might go on to play for England, and so they're less well grounded in it. And so you can now look at it as being like, what is the best structure overall to serve county cricket and also serve the England team, because we don't need to say be playing or so many baskets, because that extra bit of cash that you get from getting a few more people into the gates at Grace Road isn't as important anymore. So you can just look at it and be like, what is just the best structure, sure, for county fans, but also for like the England team. And so if that means then putting a 50 over competition at the start of the season and playing a couple fewer first class games, a couple fewer T20 games, and maybe then playing something else, I don't know, during the 100 or whatever. I mean, as I say, I think there's a chance to almost start from scratch and say, what do we think is just the best structure, rather than like, what do we need to have to kind of keep ourselves solvent, if you see what I mean. I guess a lot of this as well actually kind of feeds into a conversation that I feel like should have been sparked more, but good to have it on this podcast at least, about a report put together by the World Cricketers Association, which used to be known as FICA, so basically the Global Players Union. The report is called Protecting History, Embracing Change, a Unified, Coherent, Global Future. It's 31 pages long, and it's really interesting stuff. I've read the whole thing. I would recommend other people do the same. It's got input from loads of players. I mean, Sana Mir, the former Pakistan captain, is one of the main people who's put it together, but also Laura Wolvart, Rashid Khan, Pat Cummins, Heather Knight, they're all involved. You've also got some big names kind of administering the game, or kind of former administrators and therefore knowledgeable voices involved too. So you've got the likes of Tom Harrison, obviously used to run the ECB. You've got no one currently at the ECB involved, but you do have someone from Nick Cox from Cricket Australia. You've got South Africa covered off. You've got an IPL team CEO, which I think is interesting. Their name's not included, but they are in there. You've got loads of players, loads of some journalists as well who have fed into this thing, and it's basically put together sort of a plan for what they think cricket should look like in the future. I think that they've drilled down into 4 key points, which is the schedule, the finances, the regulation, and then the governance. So basically saying they've put out sort of like a kind of draft schedule, which we'll get more into, a change in the economic structure, which involves capping the most given to a team from the IC at 10%, which I imagine could be a stumbling block given what the BCI currently get. The regulation stuff is interesting, but I guess that's something we talk less about and should in the future. But that's probably stuff that actually matters a lot to players that we don't talk about enough as journalists. I guess stuff around like, are players getting paid by their T20 leagues? What are we doing to stop corruption in these leagues? That kind of thing. And then the leadership is based saying, in as gentle words as possible, saying like the ICC isn't doing its job, and we need to kind of look seriously at how that organization is run.
Well, they're definitely not. I mean, I've been looking into this because the potential new European league that's coming up, like if you actually look at what an ICC sanction is, and all these leagues do talk about how they get it, like the ICC sanction states that the host board has to guarantee player payments. And how many times do we hear of certain leagues somewhere guys still haven't been paid? So obviously that just doesn't get enforced anywhere near enough. So I can certainly understand why the players are making that point.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, and there's loads in this, and later in the show we've got a chat with Rod Lyall, who's written a book about the history of the ICC, but used to be involved with KNCB, who run Dutch cricket. He's sort of an expert on this sort of thing. He's got lots and lots of thoughts on this. But Nathan, from an Irish point of view, what are your big takeaways from this document, or just from your point of view as well, I guess?
Well, my point of view, the money, sharing it out, the top line was, what is it? The top 3 countries get 83% of the revenue. That was it, wasn't it? I mean, that is staggering. I mean, yes, look, there is the point that they bring the most revenue so they could take out the most revenue. Was it Gavaskar had a go at Hussain recently by saying that your job is basically here because Indian cricket is so big. So there is that attitude going on in that part of the world. I can understand it. I don't think it's right. And obviously a players' union is just based on where they're coming from isn't going to think it's right. The schedule is really interesting. The kind of right, here are our T20 windows, and here, as in franchise windows, and here are our international windows, because there are probably about 4 or 5 countries who that won't be particularly relevant for, because outside of their own host leagues, So maybe like a Bangladesh or whatever it is, or, you know, guys who still play for the West Indies as opposed to guys who are on the T20 circuit. They're not going to lose that many players over the course of the year. So they're going to have massive windows, if this is what it looks like, where they don't play international cricket and maybe their players aren't off in T20 leagues. So I think there's an opportunity there for smaller countries to play each other more. Again, how do you make that financially work? How do you get people interested in that? Those are very interesting conversations to have. So yeah, it was interesting, but it left me with a couple of questions on, okay, but what does it look like for all of the countries, including the smaller ones, in terms of their player pool and how busy or otherwise they might be?
Yeah, that was the trickiest thing for me, because if they've got a kind of a draft schedule there, and you talk about franchise windows. Really, franchise cricket is the wall, and international cricket is the windows. They've got sort of, I think, 4 small windows outside of international tournaments for international cricket, and then the rest is, as they put it there, free market.
Free market,
which and
I hate
It's
that
not tariffed,
phrasing.
is it?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, and
put tariffs on T20 leagues,
and so yeah, those are 3 weeks long each of those windows. So you get 12 weeks of international cricket, some global tournaments, taking up about 6 to 8 weeks, and then the rest of the year. So that's well over half the year, 2/3 of the year almost is T20 stuff and domestic stuff. And as you say, there's the thing that actually, what do the countries who aren't playing, who don't have loads of players going to these leagues, what do they do in that time? And then also, because the other thing they advocate for is for all international cricket to have context, basically introducing a proper structure for ODI cricket and T20 cricket, which it's been flirted with in the past but hasn't been properly nailed down. And I guess also, how do you then end up playing, like, does, say, an Ireland Zimbabwe series, I guess that's still just fine outside of that structure, but then you would have some teams who are playing a lot more international cricket than others if some are just into the structure. And then the other thing is with this structure as well, that they've said that they want a minimum series length of 1 game for each of these series, which isn't enough, is it?
Surely that should be taken as read as well, that in order for a series to be a series, it needs one game.
Yeah. Just go on tour and don't play any cricket. The point about the structure and the context is critical, because, I mean, it was a travesty they got rid of the Super League when they did. I've been on here before parroting about 2 divisions of Test cricket, but also how do you include, if you want to include, the Cricket World Cup League 2, CWCL2, is that what it's called? With the Scots, the Nepal, the Dutch, all those guys, because those are the teams who Ireland, Zimbabwe, maybe not Afghanistan because they'll have a lot of players playing franchise cricket, Bangladesh when there's no BPL, that type of thing. Those are the teams really that if the same 3 countries don't want to just play each other again and again when they have the free windows or when their players aren't playing franchise cricket, those are the countries that they should be reaching out to and saying, right, well, let's get involved. Let's go tour Nepal. Let's get the Dutch involved. Let's get the Scots involved. But obviously then you're into funding, who hosts it, who pays for it, because the lower full ranked members, certainly Ireland in this case, can't afford to host much cricket, and then obviously the guys in that second division of ODI cricket don't get the full member funding, so they really would struggle to host cricket. So that's, again, something else that I would like to have seen is, right, well, how are all these series going to be funded? If it is going to be a Super League, again, does the ICC get involved and help with hosting fees? That sort of thing, because that's ultimately where this is going to have to go for these smaller nations.
On the economic side of things, I mean, Ireland are in an interesting position, aren't they, here, because they are a full member. So, they're the lowest full member in terms of funding, I think, but they still are a lot better off than when they were an associate team. And yet, do you get the feeling that would they almost accept like a slight reduction even, or like that they would rather sort of a big increase for the likes of Scotland, Netherlands, etc., than like a small increase for themselves? Because actually that would help Irish cricket because of their kind of position in world cricket, even though they have that full member status, if you see what I mean.
I think yes and no, at the risk of fudging the question, because they're still playing just as much, if not slightly less cricket actually than they did, well, not even full membership in terms of the ICC funding hike in 2023. 23 or 24? 24. Start of 2024. Like in 2022, they hosted a lot more cricket internationally than they are hosting this year. Just, I don't know if it's inflation, if it's cost of temporary infrastructure for grounds. They say they're spreading out the budget a little bit more to grassroots and things like that. But so they absolutely would not take any further reduction because they're already not increasing the amount of cricket they play. They would certainly say, yeah, bring other people up so that they can also afford to host games and give them more money as well. But again, I don't see how it happens necessarily without either. Are you then going to all of a sudden elevate Scotland and Nepal to full membership? That's a conversation that, you know, Scotland, I don't think they particularly want that to happen right now. They don't see themselves as ready. Or is it just a case of that, like I said, that second division of ODI cricket just gets a bit more love? I'm not 100% sure.
And I guess what we haven't talked about at all in this discussion really, Katya, is women's cricket. And I guess there's an element of this where women's cricket is kind of maybe slightly less far along the path in terms of, you know, having all these T20 leagues everywhere. And so you might say there's kind of an opportunity to define the schedule in the right way as we're going along, rather than to let it kind of just all spiral out of control. And yet also this is all happening in a world where, you know, the things that made the men's game as it is, which is, you know, I guess the power of the BCCI, you know, the lack of finance for some of the smaller boards, that's already in place rather than something that's developing. So is it going to become even worse, or is it going to be better? And we don't have a vision for that yet, I suppose.
No, I mean, brutally honest, you know that you read that report in far more detail than I have, but we already have a free market window for the WPL, I guess, and that was the big thing to come out of the next future tour schedule for the women, was that IPL is blocked out pretty much. But if you're looking at making a financially sustainable model for the women's game and also a competitive model, you need to look at leveling the teams up more than, I mean, it's an obvious point, but you need to look at leveling teams up more than they are at the minute. Like India, Australia, England, Australia, and then India, England, South Africa, West Indies. It's not sustainable to have just that group.
New Zealand,
New Zealand as well, to have that group as the competitive model. I mean, you look at the cricket that happened here last year, or the two women's series. Yes, New Zealand went and won the T20 World Cup. Not sure that's completely representative of where they stand in the bilateral series women's game, but it was a complete walkover, and you're not going to get fans, you're not going to sustain these record-breaking audiences that are in ECB press releases if you're going to have that kind of cricket. And then you've also got to look at the league below. If you look at League 2 of the Cricket World Cup, and you had Zimbabwe inducted into that league, unless I'm making a complete mistake. But what I worry for developing future models of the women's game is that the ICC develop it based on models of the men's game, and base it on the teams in the men's game that are the strongest and want to level those up, rather than teams like Nepal or the Netherlands, who have traditionally been stronger in women's cricket. So yeah, you can't look at the men's game and then make a model for the women's game, and that's what I worry is going to happen in the report. But then if you're saying that, you know, Laura Wolfhart and Sana Mir and Heather Knight have all been involved in that process, that's a really positive step, that women's voices are now being included in these planning process. And it's something that we saw in England with Project Darwin and the changes to the women's game that count. The one thing that I've heard from most county cricketers is that they now feel that their voices are being heard at a planning level, rather than just we're going to do this, what do you think? It's what do you need, rather than what do you think. And if we can translate that up to an ICC model as well, then that would be preferred. It
should also be said, I mean, we talk about context, there is the Women's Championship, right? They still have their Super League equivalent going. I don't know what the plans is for adding more teams to it. I think countries like Ireland got involved because it was at the end of 21, was it? There was that World Cup qualifier that got canned because of the COVID variant, and they all had to fly home in the middle of a qualifier. I think based on the way results are going, like someone like Thailand looked like they might actually do really well in that qualifier and make it into this championship. That was quite controversial at the time, actually, that they got excluded, wasn't it? So look, at least they're on that side of things, there is a competition that gives context. And I know that some of the smaller nations have, you know, they've been delighted because it means they have to play games, and their board has to organize games for them. Similar to the way the old ODI Super League did for the men. So I don't know why that context exists for the women and not for the men, but at least it is there, and it means something. When you look at that World Cup, or the World Cup qualifier that's going to happen it's happening now, actually, right?
It starts tomorrow, Wednesday.
Starts tomorrow.
Yeah.
That could be some of the most competitive cricket we see in the women's game all year. Like, you've got West Indies in that, plus Scotland could be really competitive in that as well. So you've got a real almost level playing field, a levelist, I don't know what the right word I'm trying to use is, but you've got a pretty equal level of playing field for competition that you don't have in the senior competition. If you look at the T20 World Cup last year, and you had Pakistan in it, who did really badly. I'm not going to talk about England, but and Bangladesh as well. and you look at the qualifier, that could be an even kind of more competitive tournament than the senior level.
Oh, that qualifier, it's going to be chaotic. So it's Thailand are in it, West Indies, Bangladesh, probably two favourites, Pakistan are in there, Scotland, you mentioned, Ireland are in there. I mean, you look at that and you go, right, we'll pick a top two from that. West Indies, I think you'd say are reasonably
You've also
safe.
got an injury to Deandra Dottin, so she's not playing in it as well. So that's
and
another
in Lahore
level
as well. That's tricky conditions to navigate as well. Yeah, I'm really excited for that, and seek out the Women's Cricket Weekly podcast this week as well for more on that. And to chat more about the WCA report, we're joined by Rod Lyall, author of The Club, which uncovers the fascinating history of the ICC and its evolution from the Imperial Cricket Conference to the International Cricket Council. It's a very, very interesting read. There's lots of details you'll have forgotten or have never known. It takes right from the very start to the present day. Well worth checking out. Rod is a cultural historian and a retired academic, and he's been involved with Dutch cricket heavily, and knows his stuff. So this is a really interesting chat that I learned a lot from. Hi Rod, glad to have you on the show from Sydney. We'll get into the weeds of the WCA report and the Wolf report in a bit, but I'm going to start where I think we often start in these discussions about the ICC, by asking, what actually is it? I mean, what does it do in terms of organising the game? Because like the rules are done by the MCC, teams organise their own fixtures, and then apart from that, it's hard to tell what the direction is. So like, it organises World Cups, we can definitely say it does that. Does it do much more than being an events management organisation, or is that unfair? I don't know.
Yeah, it does do other things. It runs the umpiring panels. It's the ultimate point of resort for disputes between members. I mean, it has over 100 members, although most people only know about the 12 full members. It's got over 100 members. It does provide support, not as much as it used to, but it does provide support for the associates. It disburses money. That's an issue we might come back to, but it does disburse money to its members. Some of its members more than others. Yeah, I mean, its role has expanded from what it was when the Imperial Cricket Conference was first set up in 1909. I mean, then it was all about the future tours and really almost nothing else. And gradually its role has expanded. Even in the 1920s, there were discussions about laws, about changes to laws. Ultimately the decision was taken by the MCC, but the members had views and would represent those views. And since the MCC was basically running the ICC, somebody called it the foreign desk of the MCC. Discussions at ICC level would automatically feed into the consciousness of the MCC. But yes, there's no doubt that since it turned itself into the International Cricket Council in 1989, it has steadily expanded its role, although you can still argue that it's certainly not fully a global governing body in the same way that FIFA is, or the IOC, or World Rugby.
Yeah, and I guess we can maybe get onto what it should be a bit more later. And we should also talk about the WCA report. But I was actually struck reading your book by the stuff about the Wolf report. So the book opens with this, and I had to confess that I didn't know as much about it as perhaps I should, which is maybe also indicative of what the impact of that report, I guess, eventually was. So I'll summarize and you tell me exactly what I get wrong, basically. So I think this was back in 2012 and was in response actually to another thing I'd forgotten about, which was that the plan for the 2015 World Cup was for it to be just the 10 full members with no qualification at all. And then in response to the backlash to this a bit, the IC commissioned a report which recommended a whole load of things which you'll tell us about and was basically ignored. And then the big three power grab kind of came after that. Is that a fair summary? And what was the Wolf report actually recommending? Like, would it have been good if this was taken over, in short?
Yeah, that's a fair summary. My book is a book with lots of villains and precious few heroes, but two of the heroes are Shashank Manohar, who was the chairman of the ICC at the time, back in 2011, 12, and Harun Logat, who was the CEO. And they decided in the wake of the fight about the 10-team World Cup, and especially the only full member 10-team World Cup, that it was time for a root and branch review of the ICC and its workings and its role in world cricket. They managed it extremely successfully. They brought in Lord Wolf, who was a retired UK judge, supported by PricewaterhouseCoopers and a Pakistani retired judge. And they produced a report which was devastating, which said the ICC is essentially not fit for purpose. One of the problems is that the executive board is made up of representatives of the members, predominantly the full members, and they see their role as doing what their full members want rather than what is good for cricket. So it talked a lot about their fiduciary duty, which should be to world cricket, but is in fact to their individual member boards. And that's something which goes back to 1909, essentially. And the resource distribution model, which they said was geared much more towards full members than it should be, and not nearly enough towards development. It was a very full, very detailed report. It was rejected within days by the BCCI. And after that, really, it had virtually no chance of being adopted. Wolf always insisted that it was one complete package, that you couldn't pick and choose which bits you wanted to implement. The only bit which was really implemented was the introduction of a presidency, the splitting of the chairmanship into a president and a chairman. That didn't last terribly long, but that was the one thing that they were doing anyway, and which Wolf had recommended. But virtually all the rest of it was never implemented. And as you say, 2 years later, the Gang of Three introduced a version of the future of their own choosing, which basically gave all major events to those three countries, England, Australia, and India, and which shifted the resource distribution model massively in their favour, and most of all in India's favour. And that is essentially the situation which still prevails.
Yeah, and I think you even had that percentage go even more in India's favour, haven't you? I guess one thing I was trying to work out is it even fair to call this a sliding doors moment? Because it feels like there was just no chance it was ever going to get adopted. And again, we will get onto on the WCA report. Do you think that that's going to be a similar situation now, that kind of anyone who has an idea that, you know, might be worth discussing, if it involves the BCI getting a bit less money, then it's kind of, you know, dead in the water before we've even got around to talking about it, kind of thing?
I fear it may be. If you think back to that moment in 2012 and the 12, 13 years since, what we've seen is a further growth in the IPL, which is a serious, and then also its offshoots, the South African T20 competition, the franchise leagues, which are proliferating around the world, and now Indian money buying into the ECB's 100 competition, squeezing out international cricket. And that situation has just got steadily worse since the Wolf report. And the BCCI's grip on world cricket is probably stronger now than it has ever been, even stronger than it was in 2012. So whether the group around Jay Shah, who is now chair of the ICC, whether they are prepared, will be prepared to listen, is a huge question. It's very striking when you look at the subcommittee that has drafted the report and the 64 stakeholders that they have consulted. There is a very, put it mildly, there is a very sparse representation of Indian cricket. One recently retired woman player, one journalist, and that's about it. So the Indians have not been brought to the party. Maybe they declined to come to the party. Who knows? If you look at the report, the WCA report on its merits, it's a basis for further discussion. I've got lots of reservations about it, but it's a great start. I take the view, I think I've already said, that it is the most hopeful moment since the publication of the Wolf report itself. That was false hope, as it quickly turned out. This may well prove to be as well, but as I argue it towards the end of the book, if we don't do something, the ICC is probably doomed. The economy, the structure of the ecosystem of international cricket as it developed in the 20th century is probably doomed as well.
Yeah, I mean, let's talk a bit more about the actual merits and drawbacks, I guess, of the report as well, because I think, that's worth doing if we have this one chance to save cricket, need to get it right, I guess. So why don't you talk about some of the things that you do just really like from it, and some of the bits where you think that there's room for improvement or that doesn't get things quite right, basically.
I think they're fundamentally right about three things. I think they're fundamentally right about the finance. We have to have a system of resource distribution which is geared to the growth of the game and development across the board. So more money for the smaller full members, more money for the associates, and that implies less money for India, and a system which is targeted towards the things that cricket needs. So rather than just giving the money to people and saying, okay, do what you like with it, put it in the Swiss bank, what the ICC ought to be doing is saying, here are our priorities, here is our vision for the next 5 years, the next 10 years, the next 20 years. These are the things we are going to earmark money for. They do earmark money for things. They earmark money for associates competitions like League Two. They earmark money for the World Cup, for all their major events. So they could take that principle a lot further. And the second thing that the WCA, I think, is broadly right about is the need to replace a system of largely bilateral cricket between the full members with competition cricket, with competitive cricket, with leagues in all three formats, and for both men and women. And they actually have detailed schemes for that. I have some quibbles about some aspects of that, but broadly speaking, I think that's the way to go. They do, however, talk about a minimum requirement for the competitions of one game against each of your opponent in each format over a 2-year cycle. They say, yeah, sure, you can have five match Ashes series if you want, but what the system will be built around is one-off ODIs, one-off T20Is, one-off test matches. And it seems to me that is a problem. It's a problem linked to the fact that they want to leave as much space in the calendar for what they call the free market and to restrict the international windows to 84 days a year, which in my view would not be nearly enough. So I think there's a huge area of debate there. But I think broadly speaking, saying we need context-filled international cricket in every format all the time is right. And I think the third thing they're right about is the failure of leadership. The fact that the ICC, as even Greg Barclay said as he disappeared as chairman, the ICC is not fit for purpose. There needs to be a revolution in the way in which international cricket is governed. And they have some suggestions about that, which I think are an interesting starting point.
Yeah, I was struck by the one game series thing as well. That would be a shame if adopted across the board. It's interesting you mentioned Greg Barclay there, because that interview there was an interview he did with Nick Holt a while ago as he departed from the ICC, and some of the stuff he was saying was quite radical. And you're kind of surprised given that he's been in charge and not seemingly tried to implement any of the big ideas that he had. And I also, again, some of the ideas that he had, I wasn't hugely happy with. But like even then, he was sort of, he was advocating for full membership to be abolished altogether. You just have, everyone is just a member of the ICC. I guess, do you sense that there is some sort of appetite for change from the people that matter? Or is it kind of the case where, the players maybe feel like they're playing too much and not playing the right cricket, but they don't have the power to make change? How does change happen? Or is that not really something that is feasible, I guess?
Yeah, I mean, that is the $64 million question. Greg Barclay had just been deposed. So I think we have to read his comments in that light. The smaller full members have very little room for manoeuvre because they know, and the BCCI has demonstrated, if they get out of line, they will suddenly find that they don't get the lucrative series against India and maybe against Australia and England that they need in order to survive. Yeah, it's a $64 million question, but it's also a catch-22 because the only way you're going to improve your situation is by developing a spine and standing up to the BCCI. But if you do so, you run the risk that the rug will be pulled from under you. How does change happen? Change happens when people are prepared to say, we've had enough. I'm not going to make the obvious link to world affairs and the massive demonstrations that we saw in a certain country yesterday. But there is a point at which maybe the situation becomes so bleak. Freedom is just another name for nothing left to lose. At the moment, the smaller countries, and even the bigger smaller countries, which is everybody except India, still have things to lose. But the clever thing about the WCA report, I think, is that they haven't singled out an offending country in the way that Wolf, without ever naming the BCCI, all too obviously did. They've presented their proposals as constructive. I think there's a lot still to be hammered out, and there's a lot I would be unhappy about if the report were implemented in its complete form. One thing that strikes me is that, on the one hand, the report is written in the interest of global cricket as a whole. But after all, in the final analysis, the WCA is a trade union. A lot of the proposals about regulation, about the massive free market windows, which aren't windows. I mean, the windows are the international cricket stuff. When is a power play not a power play? The bottom line for the WCA is improving the situation of its members, giving them more scope for earning more money and restricting international cricket to a degree that I think, from what you've said, you and I would agree would be excessive. So it's how you find that balance. If the people who currently run world cricket were interested in striking a new balance, then maybe the debate could be productive. But that requires an openness on the part of people who have not really demonstrated much capacity for openness in the past.
The other thing that I find interesting is trying to work out how cricket will change sort of economically over the next few years. I mean, we've got these hints about Saudi Arabia making a real play into cricket. There's so many ways that the game could go, and at least there's one organisation out there with an idea of what they think it should look like. Whereas if you look around the world elsewhere, there's just people who are kind of maybe just stumbling along without much of a vision.
Or a vision which is entirely geared to their own self-interest. And yes, the WCA report is also geared to self-interest, but it's quite a large self-interest because it's all the players across the world who, if you think back to the Packer thing, which is the beginning, after all, of the understanding that television can be the source of big bucks for cricket. Up to that point, and even beyond that point, and arguably in many cases still today, players are appallingly treated. They're underpaid, they're overworked, they have very few rights, they're not taken seriously by their employers. in many cases, and their employers are often in no position to behave differently. Because of my long involvement with Dutch cricket, one of the things that concerns me greatly is the fact that the group of ICC members who are the leading associates, the ones who are just outside the full member category, Scotland, the Netherlands, Namibia, UAE, they get peanuts, relatively speaking, from the ICC, and that would be one of the big improvements in the financial model that the WCA is proposing. And the reason that is a problem is that there's a catch-22. You can only get the sort of full member money you need to become a full member once you become a full member. The Netherlands is currently going through a very tough financial patch because the money they get, which is almost entirely conditional on their playing in global tournaments, plus a bit for background and a bit for performance in other matches, which is very hard to get because the full members won't play them. That is simply not enough for the KNCB to do all the things it needs to do in terms of paying a cadre of international players, development at the grassroots, all kinds of organizational stuff, which they are having to cut back on because there just isn't enough money. I mean, the interesting thing about the WCA figures is that they talk about a 3% cut for India for the associates, a 100%, 500% increase. You don't have to take very much out of the massive Indian finance in order to have a lot of money to give to everybody else, including the other full members, but also, and much more notably, the associates, really all the way down. It's certainly down as far as the 30th, 40th major countries in the world. And that would be a transformation.
And if you want to find out more about that book, head to pitchpublishing.co.uk/shop/club, and we'll put a link to that in the description as well. And then finally, let's do a little bit of IPL. I mean, I don't know if anything caught your eye this week. There was one thing for me that we should mention, which was Tilak Varma. Did you see this? Yeah, I mean, I don't like the impact sub rule on the whole for what it means for cricket, for how it allows teams to get out of jail, for what it's doing to bowlers. But what I do really like is when you see, I mean, obviously this happens quite often as you get an impact sub that comes in and they get out first ball. That's always great. This is even better, where Tilak Varma was impact subbed in, and then with one ball left of the 19th over, he gets retired out. So that's the ultimate embarrassment. That's that's the equivalent of a substitute getting hooked in football, isn't it? And they do that for Mitchell Santner, who then he hits two, I think, off the last ball of that over, and then Hardik Pandya is then denying him the strike in the final over. So you've retired someone out to get someone in, who the batter who's already in is saying like, no, I don't want you to bat, I'm going to keep the strike. And then so Santner faces two balls, one of which is the last ball of the game, and as we've already discussed, the game was still not on the line at that point in time. So that is that's just great work all around for Mumbai Indians. Yeah.
Who bowled the 19th? Was it like a left-handed batter matchup or something that they were looking to take advantage of for like one ball because they knew Hardik was going to strike hog? Or
I think it was Shardul Thakur. And also, if you are going to take advantage of that, then retire him out earlier rather than with one ball to go. Yeah.
This is how the IPL competes with the county championship, right? You've got to out ridiculous to be the top league at different points in the year.
Hey, it's got us talking about it.
That is all for this week. Reminder that throughout the IPL season, Wisden Cricket Weekly podcast is proudly partnered with Remitly. Cheering the teams we love is what it's all about, and the team we love most fiercely is family. Millions of people around the world trust Remitly to send money safely, quickly and affordably to their loved ones, making sure that more of the money they send reaches back home. Because at the end of the day, family matters most. Ready to give Remitly a try? Download the Remitly app today and enjoy a special offer on your first transfer. Cheers.